Mr. Vivek Krishna Govind, my friend Mr. Srinivasan, my very distinguished young friends coming from different parts of India, pursuing different professions, vocations, but bound together by this great idea talking about nation building, and more than that, trying to contribute something to the building of a nation. Well, Vivek, your father and you have known me, and therefore you have been very partial to me. And let me say at the outset that I'm not such a biscuit. I came like many other officers of a particular service to which I belonged, and I happen to do this, that, and the other at many places. Be that as it is, the subject which you expect me to talk about, I heard now, is a public-private partnership in the context of governance or good governance. Well, governance, good governance, these two have become buzzwords now. When I entered government, I entered government as a teacher, but that was long ago. Subsequently, when I entered government and started working in the state of Punjab, the word governance was not heard at that point of time. This phrase public-private partnership was not heard at that point of time. Well, but we practiced the governance. States were governed by state governments in the context of the Constitution of India and the Government of India. We still had panchayats. We had to start with district boards, which were set up even before India became independent. So the structure of governance, to a large extent, we inherited. The major change in the structure of governance was extended through the introduction of what we call the Panchayati Raj. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that Panchayati Raj, that phrase. Some of you may not be. I won't be surprised if some of you are not familiar with it. But the most important structural change which was sought to be brought about in the field of governance in India since independence, I believe, has been the introduction of Panchayati Raj during the time of the late Rajiv Gandhi. Well, even before Panchayati Raj was formally made as a part of the constitutional framework, Panchayats did exist from time immemorial. As I said, in those areas which were under the British rule, like the Punjab, we had what we call the district boards, which looked after many areas of administration or governance at the district level. For instance, schools were run by the district boards, hospitals were run by the district boards, and the boards had the full authority to recruit teachers, the boards had the full authority to recruit doctors working in that particular district. Well, let me say that in spite of the fact that Panchayati Raj became a part of the constitution and Panchayats and Panchayati Raj institutions at the three levels, the district, the block, and the village. These are the three tiers of the Panchayati Raj. Unfortunately, in many parts of the country, most parts of the country, even today, in spite of the provision of the Constitution and maybe in spite of the state level legislations, these bodies have not been fully empowered. So we have, constitutionally mandated institutions of governance with no effective power. You may have been, at least some of you, been reading about, the Panchayati Raj ministers lamenting about the lack of seriousness on the parts of state governments to delegate or to give up power enjoyed by the state in favor of the local government institutions. This is one part of the story, because I thought it may be useful for us to remind ourselves that governance is not just what Government of India does or what the state governments do. The Constitution mandates that in India we will have governments at the local level. And part of the functions which traditionally have been performed by the state governments have been assigned to these local bodies. Say agriculture, say primary education. These are subjects which are supposed to be transferred to the Panchayati Raj bodies for governance. If you look at the rationale of it, I'm sure you would appreciate that this concept is possibly the best that we can think of, we can adopt in a large country like ours with so much of diversity all around. What prevails, the situation that prevails either in the area of law and order or agriculture or any area of human endeavor would be different from state to state. What you train in the Punjab may not be what you see in the state of Kerala. So, taking into account this diversity and the requirements of local areas, local government institutions are supposed to be the democratic answer, the democratic institutional framework for meeting the aspirations of the people of those areas. Well, I mentioned this only to remind you that when we talk of governance or good governance or bad governance, that concept has got to be embracing all this. Governance at the Government of India level, governance at the state level, and governance at the local level, the panchayats or the municipalities. And when we talk in terms of public-private partnership in government, well, I believe that even before this phrase also became a buzzword, there was partnership, there was association between government and the private sector, or the government and the private, in terms of delivery of services and in terms of developmental activities. Kerala is a very classic example of that. The contribution that the private sector made in the field of education, in the field of healthcare, is, I believe, the foundation for what Kerala has achieved in these two areas. Without active participation and involvement of the private sector, by the private sector, I mean, it's not the corporate sector that I mean. I mean, organizations, institutions, people outside the government, not bound by the rules and regulations of government, not a part of government. They have contributed substantially to the healthcare sector, to the education sector in Kerala. Well, I can think of contribution made by many small organizations working at local levels, at state levels in the Punjab, for instance, in these areas, not as significant but as important as it was in Kerala. And in the case of industry, let me say that there was a concept of the joint sector during the heyday of the license permit Raj. I had the opportunity of being actively involved in industry for more than 10-15 years in the Punjab. And participation of private industry in the development of industry in the Punjab was a very, very significant factor. Actually, I have made many friends from industry during those days on account of the close interaction between the industry and the government had. But let me also mention that those days there was a bit of a, what you call a confrontationist attitude at times. Most of the time, industry and industry associations would come up with chapters of demand, about tax, about this, about that, and the government was always, yes, at the receiving end and resisting. Well, it was seldom appreciated that active cooperation of private capital and government both contribute to the development. There was an underlying suspicion that private industry is all for private profit, and that private profit would be at the expense of the public exchequer or at the expense of public funds. Therefore, this attitude was there very much. I remember that. And those who went out of it, or those who broke that kind of barrier and cooperated with industry at times was looked upon with a certain amount of suspicion. I must confess that. But those days were over. And but at the same time, remember that it was during the heyday of the license permit Raj that the concept of a joint sector, which means participation of private industry in promoting industry which were sought to be brought into a state by the state. See, industrial development corporations those days used to get what we call a piece of paper called the letter of intent for starting a project. The cost of that project, the estimated cost of a project, if exceeded, believe me, 5 crores of rupees at one point of time, you had to obtain a letter of intent, and that letter of intent was easy to come for a state institution. That state institution would then go through a process of selecting a private partner, and that private partner and the state corporation would form a joint venture company. In Kerala, there was one of the major industries which came up in Kerala, organized sector. You remember the Punjab and the batteries. In Punjab, no, the Toshiba Anand, not Punjab Anand. Punjab Anand was in Punjab. Punjab Anand batteries, which is no longer in existence today, was a joint venture of the Punjab Industrial Development Corporation and the private promoter, Mr. Anand. So was Toshiba in Kerala. There are many such projects, many such companies which were partnered between the private sector and government-owned institutions in many parts of the world. That was the pattern. That was the that was the model which was available at that point of time. So public-private partnership for development is therefore nothing new. But definitely, from promotion of small or large industrial projects to other areas is something which has started taking place of late, largely on account of the inability of the government to provide the funds which are required for a large scale of developmental activities, and number two, the gradual realization on the part of government that government officers are not 100% equipped to take over activities for promoting industrial projects and also similar other developmental activities. So constraints on resources and the capability of private industry to provide the requisite human resource for managerial capability for running these enterprises, for running programs, became more and more accepted. And now, therefore, we have very active involvement of private sector in not only industry, but in many other areas. Healthcare, education, you name it. Of course, the most visible and the most important, both in terms of impact and in terms of financial outlays, will be the infrastructure sector. The large power projects, the large projects, I mean the airport projects, the port projects, other than railways. Railways is yet to open up. In all these areas, we have great, examples of public-private partnership. Now, as we all know now, even interactive sessions between associations of industry and government are becoming more and more, or have become more and more frequent, more and more intense. Exchange of ideas, exchange of views, and government officers, officers, ministers, at all levels, trying to understand the point of view of the industry, trying to understand the point of view which is prevailing outside the government, and learn from that. So many new programs of the government, before they are initiated, the ministries concerned do have consultative sessions with the stakeholders, the new phrase, whether it is healthcare industry, healthcare or education. This consultative process, even before forming policies and legislation, has also become very common. Well, at the same time, let me also say that even today, at least in certain, well, I have certain constraints there, I won't be able to speak out loud and clear, but I can only articulate to some extent what I feel sometimes, that at all levels in society, perhaps this understanding or this appreciation has not seeped into, that whether you work in a private profit-making company or in a non-governmental or a non-profit-making organization or in government, all of us can come together for what we call promoting the public good. There is a suspicion, I suspect, even today, that private profit motive is not totally accepted in certain areas. When we talk in terms of large-scale organized industry getting into education or healthcare, there are still lurking fears that the private profit-making motive will be what motivates or drives the relevant industry into these areas, and therefore one has got to guard oneself, or government has got to guard itself against the possibility of these activities becoming totally commercial. Well, there are various aspects of it. I'm not an expert either in healthcare or in education. Therefore, I'm not in a position to go into details, nor do I think it appropriate to concentrate on that particular aspect. Now, let me also mention today that when we talk in terms of, or when people talk in terms of good governance, there is a general feeling, which most of you also get, I am afraid, that governance has gone for a sixer, nothing is happening in this country. It is corrupt, it is scam-ridden, once a day you have this, that and the other, whether there is coal or whatever you talk about, that it is all corrupt, it is all seeped in this, somebody is making money and without making money nothing happens, this kind of a thing. I do not know how far you are influenced by that kind of, not pessimism, it's worse than that. Sometimes some of us feel helpless, frustrated, saying, what the hell is happening? Am I also part of it? While doing work in government or while doing work in a private industry, sometimes you are not even sure what is happening above you, what is happening below you, and you are sometimes caught in between all these things. These are all thoughts which naturally come to all of us who read newspapers, all of us we look at the television. It's very natural. But I'm not going to internationalize this issue and or talking in terms of what is that, Srini? What is that? Earlier used to be the unseen hand behind, but what is it called? I mean, when you talk in terms of security or something like that. So I'm not talking about any of those things. I'm not hinting at any of those things. But I would request you to take a couple of minutes, once in a while, to think where you were in this country, say 10, 15 years ago, and where are you all today. If I say that, but for the progress made by this country during the last few years, most of us would not have been here today. At least I can say that for myself. We would just not have been here today. I am not asking you to go back to 1947 or 48. Think about the 60s. Think about the 70s. There is a world of difference. There is a world of difference. You see, the other day I traveled from Cochin to a place called Ramapuram, not far away. Ordinarily it takes about 2.5 hours, but because of or thanks to the monsoon, I am told, the journey took more than 3 hours. I don't know whether any of you have been to that place called Ramapuram. Srini, you would have seen it. That's right, I went to see it. I tell you, I drive around, or I am driven around in Delhi, in an area where, because of the neighborhood of a court and this and that, large number of cars you see when you go to the office, when you come back. And you believe me, Srini, the number of Skoda cars which I saw on my journey from Kochi to Ramapuram, I won't be able to see in my neighborhood in Tilak Marg in New Delhi. More nanos there. Well, I'm talking about Kerala, I'm talking about Kochi, I'm talking about, not even Kochi, Kochi even understands. This is Kochi to Ramapuram. Now again, you know, I don't know how many of you go to Guruvayur or to go to Trichy. Go from here on the highway to Guruvayur or to Trichy. I do not know which place. On the way, when we go from here, on the left side, I normally travel in the night, but still, you see, you know, neon lights of the Toyotas and the Hyundais of this world. All the showrooms. So what does it mean? Does it mean that something has changed in this country? I mean, you think for yourself. I'm not going to give you any explanation, whether it is on account of the Gulf boom or whether this is that. I mean, you forget about all those things. Just think of it. I realize what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Well, all of you are, you know, old enough to see the changes which are taking place in your own area. I have got my friend coming from Mohali. I used to live and work in that place for a long period of time. I tell you, the roads of Mohali, I must take the blame for that. When I was Secretary Industries and when we promoted that industrial estate, it is known as an industrial estate. You know, the roads were not motorable, believe me, in the beginning. And it was in that condition that the Punjab tractors, the Punjaban batteries, which started coming up in the early 1970s. Punjab tractors is now Mahindra tractors. Punjaban batteries, unfortunately, that closed down. But what I'm trying to say is that huge changes. Progress you call in the material sense. We are talking only about that. I'm not talking about you know, the ethics or the morality or you know, or the spiritual progress or the decline over a period of time. But in terms of the so-called standard of living of our people, in terms of creature comforts which people enjoy, we have progressed tremendously. It is not good enough. Today, even today, I realize, while we are talking here, while we are enjoying the good things in life, get out of this, you will see people coming from Bihar or from Odisha, toiling 24 hours a day in the most miserable conditions. Well, you and I are used to it. Therefore, our conscience doesn't prick us very much. But for us, they toil. The five-star hotels you have, the commercial establishments that you have today, all of them are built by the hard toil of these people. But for them also it is progress in the sense that otherwise they would have been facing starvation. I chatted with two of them yesterday. I was mentioning to my friend Srini, one of them is from Odisha, Baharampur district, and the other is from Bihar. They have nothing, little bits of land. One of them said that his wife, he and 5 children, and the other one said that his wife is no more, and he has got 2 sons, doing nothing in the village. One of them said he gets a regular salary of 8,000, and the other said he gets, daily wage of 500 to 600 rupees, but most of the day. So he makes about 7,000 rupees. So that part of India, I am fully conscious of. While being a part of these are our crowd, you and I belong to a crowd which is far above the one which work for us, toil for us. So to my mind, the endeavor of all of us together, whether you are in government, whether you are outside government, it makes no difference in today's context, is to see to what extent, in what manner, can we do something which will improve the general level of living in this country so that those who have nothing to fall back upon are also getting at least a square meal a day. To my mind, the endeavor of all of us and what we describe as good governance or bad governance or whatever it is. Governments provide the structure, the framework. This country has a constitution, we know that. We elect once in 5 years or periodically members of a state legislature, members of a parliament who frame the laws under which you and I, all of us, live and work. And we also know that those who break the law, they are brought to book by the court, by the judiciary. We also know that aberrations in governance, aberrations in any way, whether it is in the administration, the police, or the revenue, whatever, they are brought out by a very vibrant, by a very active media. Well, these are the institutions which exist today within the framework of which we have to function either as individuals, part of government, or part of industry, part of academic institution, whatever it is. And I have no definition of good governance other than, of course, it will have to be broken into parts. I mean, you can't say good governance in that sense and then work for common good and kind of things. But I sincerely believe that each one of us can contribute to what we call good governance. Earlier in the day, we were talking about something else, and we realized that unless you have both the hands, you won't be able to clap. When you talk about corruption, when you talk about inefficiency, when you talk about this, that, and the other, let's realize that it's not just one person. If you use the modern phraseology, there are various stakeholders, whether it is in a corrupt practice or whether it is providing education or whether it is providing health care. Again, let's realize that in terms of infrastructure, what we have got today is far better, isn't it, than what it used to be. Infrastructure in terms of schools, in terms of colleges, in terms of any other thing. But ultimately, it is we, the human beings, we have to work. We have to make them work. See, in the best of hospital building, with the best of equipments, if if the doctors are not performing, it doesn't amount to very much. So is the case about teachers. So is the case about factory workers. So is the case with all of us. So therefore, instead of, my very humble, very practical approach to governance is, instead of talking big about reforming the world, instead of talking big about reforming the country, let's talk about what we can do ourselves in our own context, in our own limited way. If I do a good job of the assignment given to me, I think I contribute to good governance more than giving 20 lectures at different firms. We all are reasonably educated people. We all read newspapers, watch the TV. We know what is going wrong. We are told that many things are going wrong. Yes, you all realize that. But to repeat that, how does it help? If you say that the government is useless, government officers are corrupt, by repeating that 100 times, what the hell are we getting? Does it inspire you to do better work? My dear friends, does it motivate you? At the end of a lecture which is banging everybody around, does it give you a feeling that, look, you are part of a society which is motivated, which is inspired to do something better for itself? But I stopped at this. I didn't want to talk at all, but